Hello and welcome to Alabama Carry All. Today, I will be your host, Antwain, and we have a special guest with us today. We have Miss Shannon Dye, and today we'll just be going over special needs estate planning. For starters, let's go ahead and start with you, Miss Shannon. So this is my first time working with you. How long have you actually been attorney or working with children with special needs?
I've been practicing law 10 going on 11 years, but I've been doing estate planning for 8 years.
Oh wow! So pretty much most of your focus has been surrounding estate planning, special
That's
needs
right,
caregivers.
yes. Yeah, focusing. So I do estate planning, and then special needs planning is kind of a particular area that we focus on here at our firm. We all kind of have a passion for it, and so it's something that I've been doing since the beginning. So.
So, what exactly is special needs estate planning?
Well, really, usually when we're talking about special needs estate planning, we're talking about what's the best way for people to develop a plan in order to financially benefit their loved ones with special needs. So, like, for example, so I have a brother who has autism. And so part of what we did with my father was okay, we got to set up a plan, come in, let's get your will done, and let's figure out the best way to structure things so that when you are gone, that my brother can benefit, but that it doesn't affect his, SSI or Medicaid benefits in such a way that he's not able to get those anymore.
Okay, and so essentially, it seems like the person who benefits, of course, is the person with special needs, and then their caretakers in regards to this, making sure that their
That's right.
person with special needs is taken care of financially without having to put either the caregiver or the person with special needs in a kind of hardship. It seems like kind of help set up a plan.
That's right. Yeah, trying to come up with a plan that gets the best of both worlds accomplished so that they're, for example, if they rely heavily on their Medicaid benefits because they have a lot of needs, prescription needs or something like that that costs a lot of money each month, we wouldn't want them to be hurt by, getting a sudden inheritance or something like that that then throws them off track. They lose their benefits and then they're having to basically start from square one once all of that inheritance money is gone. And so we're setting up because kind of the old school way to do it was you just disinherited someone who had special needs. You left it all to your other children or other family members and essentially entrusted them with the task of caring for that person and basically on their honor system that they would use that money to care for them and to pay for things for their needs, which, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. I mean, because there was nothing that was holding that person legally accountable to do so. And so now the law is kind of developed in such a way that it says, okay, we can and we allow you to take assets to set them aside in a particular type of trust for them, and to be able to provide for things that are over and above what they might need or what their benefits pay for, essentially.
So, with these plans that are in place, does the attorney act, I guess, as a like a liaison in between making sure this is done, or does the benefits go directly to the person with special needs with someone else as like I guess the guarantor of these accounts? Is that kind of how it works?
Right. Yeah, so typically what I'm doing is I'm drafting usually, so special needs planning's, I guess, pretty broad, but generally speaking, that's referring to special needs trusts. And so I am drafting the actual trust document itself. So I have all the language that has to be in there legally speaking to make it work. So I'm doing that. I'm drafting up the trust, and then I'm assisting the parent or the guardian or the loved one who's wanting to leave funds for that person in getting those documents executed, getting them signed and legally ready. And then if and when the time comes, then the monies are going into that trust for the benefit of the person with special needs. And then at that time, the trustee, so that's the person who's actually named in the trust document, is going to step in and take over sort of the financial piece of caring for the trust. Does that kind of make sense?
It definitely does. So then, are there educational resources for advising these trust funds appropriately, or are there other means in regards to making sure that this person's educated to being able to be a trustees over these accounts?
No, it's a good question. So when you're talking about trustee, there's essentially two broad categories of options. There's number one, the individual trustee, so a friend or family member. And then the other category being the corporate trustee. So that's a bank or a trust company whose, job is to basically, administer these trusts on a daily basis. So different ones might fit for different situations, depending on how much you're talking about leaving, and the complexity of the assets involved. Like if you're leaving it all to somebody, but it's just cash, that's one thing versus you're leaving it to somebody and there's a house and there's cash and there's a retirement account and there's, all these other things. So, one situation might warrant an individual trustee while another situation might warrant a corporate. But from an individual trustee perspective, there are some resources out there. I think it's the Special Needs Alliance. You can Google them, and they have a handbook for trustees who administer special needs trusts. That might be helpful to someone who's thinking about looking into that or might become a trustee of a special needs trust. And that's a resource we offer to our clients sometimes too. And then also too, I just think, the attorney, whomever is the one that sort of set up the special needs trust, is always a good resource to go to for that person as well. Um, Initially, they should provide some guidance, about, okay, here's generally what we're talking about that things can be spent on or can't be spent on, and, all of that. But then I think once the trust actually becomes into being, and the administration's actively taking place, then that attorney or advisor can offer more practical tips, from okay, I've got this issue. What do I do here? And just sending out reminders. Sometimes we do that to our clients who are trustees of, okay, making sure you're doing tax reporting, making sure, you're doing all these things that need to be done from an administrative standpoint for the trust.
So, how does it work if the trustee actually is the caregiver in that instance
Mhm.
as well? So, say the caregiver is the one leaving behind the funds to take care of that, and we'll just say maybe somewhere written in the will, is that, if this person can't be a caregiver, then they go to a facility of a sorts that was pre-approved or on, all that stuff. Does the trusted funds then go through, I guess, the corporate account and then maybe to that facility in regards to, I guess, monthly payments? Or how does that work?
So the trustee, yes, so the trustee would still be the trustee, and they would just facilitate the payments to the facility that, say, if there was a reason that they had to move into a treatment facility or whatever it was, a residential facility, then the trustee would be the one in charge of basically making the payments to that facility for the benefit of that person. So the trustee who's named is essentially the trustee unless or until they either step down or they're removed or the trust terminates, meaning there's no more money in it. And so therefore
Okay.
we're wrapping it up, sort of a thing.
So, what are some steps parents can take to get started with special needs planning?
I mean, I think the number one thing is just making sure you have some sort of estate planning documents in place, going and talking to an attorney, whoever that is that specializes in estate planning. Let them know the situation, let them know that you have a loved one that you want to benefit that has special needs. And, just making sure that whoever you talk to has some knowledge about how to draft or deal with special needs trusts. So that's probably my number one, tip. And I think too, it's just kind of so that attorney should do an intake with you that involves, okay, we need to figure out what are all your assets. Okay, let's list that down on a piece of paper. Who are all your beneficiaries? Let's list that down on a piece of paper, and kind of trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together in such a way that it benefits the person whose will they're drafting, but also the beneficiaries themselves. So, like for example, there's special rules about retirement accounts now. Okay, well, there's some advantages to leaving retirement accounts to people with special needs versus other assets. And so, whoever's doing the estate plan should know those things and be able to put together the best puzzle, put all the pieces together to kind of come up with the best result for everybody. So I think step one is just go see somebody, take that first step, sit down and have that meeting. I know sometimes, especially parents, we're all so busy, and it's hard to take the time out to do that. But I think that's probably the number one step is just do that, bite the bullet.
So when should you start planning? Is this something you should plan when when the child gets closer to the age of 18, or is this something you should just kind of start from the beginning?
It's a good question. I think starting from the beginning, because as much as we all don't want to think about it, something could happen to us any day. I, you know, I could not wake up tomorrow. It's a possibility. And so I need to have that plan in place for if I were to die tomorrow, how is my child with special needs or my loved one, whomever, going to be taken care of? So I think don't put it off. Now, there's another piece to that of the guardianship piece, and that's the piece of, okay, well, once my child's becoming a legally an adult, what do I need to do? And there's other steps that need to be taken there from a perspective of care. And that certainly you wouldn't address until they're an adult, which is in Alabama, it's 19 actually. In many other states, it's 18. But getting on
Oh
board
wow.
with that, yeah, is a good idea. Right before they're about to turn that age, we're looking at that birthday, that 19th birthday. It's a good idea to come in and start meeting with the attorney at that point. So,
Okay, so it's kind of something you want to start planning and getting done, sooner rather than later, like you said.
mhm.
Tomorrow's not always promised today. But then when they get closer to an age of around 18 or so, you kind of reevaluate it to make sure all the parts and pieces are in place to make sure that, there's a transition from childhood to adulthood in regards to how these wills and trusts are managed when they become an
Definitely.
adult.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
What if the children are unable to work after the age of 18,
hmm
meaning that they
No,
have not earned any kind of form of Social Security to be able to draw from the Social Security fund?
right. No, it's a good question. So there are some, instances where, once they become an adult, you can go ahead and if they're, likely not going to be a wage earner, really of any significant capacity, then you can go ahead and apply. So there's a bunch of different types for Social Security. So I'll just go ahead and preface that by saying sometimes it can be very confusing. I mean, it can be confusing for us as attorneys, so it's certainly confusing for parents. But so there's SSI, which is supplemental security income, and that's the kind of benefit that you can get if it's needs based. So it's like my income is less than $2,000 a month, and so it's supplemented by Social Security. So that's one type of Social Security. Then there's Social Security disability, which is the kind that you were just referring to, which is what's based on your work record, and you collect off of that based on a work record. Um, but actually, there's Social Security disability rules that say if you are a person who was disabled prior to age 26 or something like that, I believe it's 26, that then once you are an adult and you're no longer considered under your parents' income, that you can, under certain instances, apply for disability and receive it. And once you apply for disability, if you're approved, then you actually would receive Medicare after 2 years of being on disability. So that's another good source of, medical coverage for individuals as well. So they get that sort of supplemental, and you can have Medicare and Medicaid at the same time. The two aren't
Wow.
mutually exclusive. Yeah, so it can be a little confusing. And then the other type of Social Security is just the traditional retirement. What you're thinking of as, okay, when I'm 65, I'm going to start collecting retirement based off, my W-2, what I've paid into the system.
Gotcha. So there's multiple different types of payouts, and
Yes.
assuming in my son's case, in this instance, he most likely won't be able to have a job in the work field by the time he turns 18. Um, and so he would meet most likely fall underneath the SSDI,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, if he
Right.
qualifies for it, he can run through that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this might be a little off subject, but you had brought it up. You said there's Medicare and there's Medicaid. Typically, Medicare is only given to those who are 65 and older, though, correct?
Typically, yes, but
Unless
in
they're
this
disabled.
situation, that's right. Yes, when they're disabled, they can
Okay.
receive Medicare early. That's right.
Now, is that drawn from the the guarantor or the parent's account or like Social
Um,
Security income?
yes, sometimes it's based on the parent's work record. And, some of those rules, the kids can actually get it earlier if they have a parent who's disabled as well. So there's certain rules about that, about when they can collect. But yes, it's essentially based on the parent's record. So as if they were still earning income, to support the child.
And that's one of those things that um, you would be able to help, or your firm would be able to help with, in regards to
Hmm.
managing those funds when they turn of age of 18. If they're on SSI or SSDI, you guys would be able to help, be able to take that form of income. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a large inheritance of a sort from or anything like that. It could just be the day-to-day management of the income that they earn just from Social Security.
Oh yeah, that's definitely something we can help people with. And there's different things, that you can do with that money. I mean, it might not be that it's so typically what happens is with the SSI or the SSDI comes in, usually there's going to be a need to spend the money, which is fine. I mean, that's kind of what its intention is. If you need to spend it for housing, for, whatever it is that you need, it's fine to do that. But for monies that aren't spent, we would actually probably recommend, and again, depending on what kind of benefits you're getting, there's other, putting it into a trust is an option, putting it into an account like such as an ABLE account, which you might have talked about before in some other episodes, which is essentially kind of like a bank account for a person with special needs where their money can go if they need spending money, that doesn't disqualify them from benefits. That's an option as well. So you can there's some different things, but absolutely we can provide guidance for people on that. And I've had people come to me and just say, what do I do in this situation? Or when they earn money, like let's say they are a wage earner, but they're not a high wage earner. They're kind of at a minimum. I'm working at Publix, I'm bagging
Door
groceries,
greeter
I'm
at
working.
Walmart.
Yeah, exactly. What do I do with that money? And so we're definitely here to advise people on those types of things because it's important, and we like to try to balance the ownership of that, and they're taking pride and they're earning wages, and what can we do with that to kind of provide some flexibility to them to be able to have access to that, but not affect their benefits.
So, what exactly is the Alabama Trust Administration then?
So the Alabama Family Trust, I think, maybe probably what you're referring to there. And so that is an organization that we refer to. It's called in legal terms, we call it a pooled trust. So what that is it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization here in Alabama that basically pools different people's trust resources. So let's say I have someone who comes in who's on SSI and Medicaid, and they're um, getting, maybe they were the plaintiff in a lawsuit somehow, or they were in a wreck and their child was in the car and the child was injured, but it wasn't severe enough that they're getting millions of dollars. Let's say maybe they're only getting $50,000 or $100,000 or something like that in proceeds from a lawsuit settlement. So what we might do, because that wouldn't really necessarily warrant, oh hey, let's set up this whole very complex trust, that costs some money. Then let's look at creating this Alabama Family Trust account where we can kind of they take your money along with other people who have similarly sized accounts, and they actually pool it for investment purposes. And so what they can do is actually earn more income. So let's say I don't really need that money right away, or my family doesn't need that money right away. It's something I want to set aside, and if it's possible to have it grow over time, that would be great. So that maybe one day it's $200,000. And so they can invest that money and actually have the money grow over time. And then they actually administer it as a trustee. So they are the trustee of the fund. So they're in charge of investing it and then also in charge of making distributions to for the benefit of the beneficiary. So the money never goes
So it
directly
seems like
to the
it's similar to
beneficiary.
a 401k, sort of like a
Yeah,
401k
kind of like a
for
third
those
party
who.
administrator. Yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy.
Interesting.
Um, so they're kind of in charge of the funds, and then you as the dad would go to them and say, "Okay, I need money to buy this for my son," and then they make a distribution from the trust for that. And again, the pro to that is for people who have smaller amounts. You can leverage your investments, make a higher return, and then also too, there's not the upfront costs that are involved with a larger special needs trust. Because we're talking about probably a few $1,000s, $2,000 to $3,000 probably to set up a special needs trust, an individual one that's going to hold, you know, a much larger, I've done them in the past before for people who've gotten, $1 million or something like that, where they were more severely injured in an accident. Maybe that accident's what caused their disability, and so we've set up that type of trust for them as well.
Now, in an instance where, say, you do receive funds like that, you get into an accident and um, you receive, funds from, the car accident for the wreck and the hospital bills and everything like that. When that money comes in, do y'all help ensure that that's not claimed as earned income to ensure that they don't lose benefit for receiving, funds from an accident like source?
Right. No, it's a good
Because I know
question.
that's
So,
actually happened. Oh, my apologies. I was saying that happened with actually my brother of mine. He got into a car accident. He's also disabled, um, and he ended up actually losing his SSI after getting the settlement
mm,
back. But unfortunately, because he didn't have a lawyer or anybody to kind of help manage over his SSI, I think he just had a quarter point of power of attorney. He ended up losing that SSI because of that, and now he
mm,
can't reapply for 2 years or something along the lines of that,
right.
and over a settlement that wasn't even over $10,000.
Yes. No, that's a good
So
point.
y'all,
So we do. Yeah, we help with that. So we would set up the special needs trust. The ideal situation would be, well, I guess the most ideal would be they have a lawyer that sort of gets us involved on the front end and it says, okay, we've got a client who's getting a settlement. They're on SSI. We need to talk about doing a trust. And so then we would talk to the client about, hey, here's the benefit you would get from doing a trust. That way you get to keep your SSI and you get to keep your Medicaid, and those are not affected. And then if the client decides, yes, I'd like to move forward with that, then we go ahead and create the special needs trust or help them with the Alabama Family Trust, depending, on however, much money is warranted there. But so we go ahead and set up the trust account, and then the lawyer basically writes the check from their settlement trust account to the trust. And so the money never actually goes through the beneficiary's hands, it just goes directly to the trust. And then it's not counted against them as income. So because they don't actually
that's
receive it as an individual.
Now, are you penalized for drawing from this 503c at any point in time for any particular reason, for the caregiver? Or are they penalized so
No,
they can withdraw as many times as they want, or are there penalties or taxes
yeah,
upon
as
that?
long as it's, I mean, their trustees monitoring to make sure, because again, they're going to be held to a fiduciary standard to make sure the requests are proper, that they're being spent for the benefit of the beneficiary. But yeah, there's no limit on the amount of times or requests that can be made. The only limitation really about how the money can be paid out is that it cannot go directly to the beneficiary. So again, because that would count as earned income to them if it passed through their hands. So the trust can't write a
Exactly.
check to the person with special needs. They have to write it to, like if I'm buying a handicap accessible van, they write a check directly to the dealer that they're buying it from, things like that. Or they write it to someone that is getting reimbursed maybe for the purchase. So, like if a parent purchased something for the benefit of their child and then they make a request to the trust to be reimbursed for that, then the trust could do that too. The key is just
Okay,
not
awesome.
having it go to the individual.
Perfect. So it can be used to help them purchase a home, an independent living type home for these individuals at a period of time, or put a down payment on something like that. It can be used for all of those things. That's amazing. That's very amazing.
That's right.
Now, I know we kind of touched on this earlier. We talked about SSI and SSDI and some of those things. Um, but do y'all provide actual consulting for individuals when they're first time applying for these things? Or is this something that
It,
typically has to be started with like a power of attorney and then they consult you, that attorney consults you after?
right. So typically, I'll say this about disability. There are usually attorneys who that's what they specialize in is the application for disability. And typically they'll do that on a contingency fee basis. So normally there's like, it's more like a plaintiff's attorney who does that type of work, who does the disability application because the way they get paid is on that contingency basis and their firm is set up to get paid that way. So I have attorney friends in a network that I sort of will refer people out to that are having trouble getting approved for,
Okay.
disability. Because that is sort of a specialized process and it's got its own court system and this whole thing. It's a very involved process. And so typically there's people that's just what they do. And so usually I'll refer clients out to them. And the advice I've gotten from my friends is typically, definitely call them, ask them for their advice, but usually they want to see people who've already applied once and been denied. And then that reapplication is when the attorney steps in and appeals it or reapplies and says, okay, now here, you know, because sometimes there will be people who get approved on that first application, but oftentimes they're not. And I understand that that's sort of just part of the process, unfortunately, now.
Yeah, we were lucky with my son Mateo when we applied for SSI. I feel like it was literally a matter of a week, 7 to 10 days, and we were instantly approved. And we got lucky at the beginning when
Wow.
everything was kind of going on without having to do any kind of talking to an attorney, appeals. It was like we applied, and then 10 days later, it was deposited. It deposited
Oh,
into our
wow.
account as a monthly
That's great.
recurring
That may be more of the
thing. So
exception than the rule, but that's great. Great to hear.
yeah, it's definitely from what I've heard from a lot of individuals. It's like tooth and nail sometimes dealing with the
Mm.
SSDI and the governments and the benefits and stuff. So we were fortunately lucky on that.
Yes, and I think
Um,
typically, especially with the disability, because it's medical, based, they tend to review that a little more harshly, and the
that
benefits are
makes
higher.
sense. So one of the things, so we've talked about the trust and the wills, but I think another big key component to all of this is also like life insurance, because life insurance also pays out to individuals. So if I have a life insurance set up for myself and something happens to me, uh, would creating these kinds of trust plans and the wills be able to kind of help facilitate those earnings into the trust count following something happening to me?
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that is usually what I hear from parents. One of the biggest ways of funding these special needs trusts is typically, okay, I don't have some $1 million legacy to leave my child, but hey, I can get this insurance policy. I can get it relatively inexpensively. And it's a good way to fund these special needs trusts. So there's the traditional life insurance policies, and then I've heard more and more about the second to die life policies as well. So you can get maybe a higher return if you do. Basically, you have the insurance on two lives instead of one. So you have it on the both parents, and then you just say the insurance only pays out when the second one of you passes away. Sometimes you can get a higher premium on those for less money. But yes, so then we would help coordinate as part of the estate planning process those beneficiary designations. So the insurance actually, when you die, doesn't pass through your estate. It passes according to your beneficiary designation. So whenever you take out the insurance policy, they'll ask you, who do you want the money to be paid to? And then you designate. And so when
Okay.
we set up the trust, we will give you instructions about, okay, here's how you need to go back and name the trust as the beneficiary of your policy. So you would name it, whatever we call it. So, like, for example, if it was my child, it would be, the die special needs trust or whatever it is. And then I would say, here's how you name it. And you name the beneficiary as the die special needs trust. And then when you pass away, then it goes to the trust directly and it doesn't have to go through probate or any of that stuff, which is nice. There's no delay.
That's amazing. So it's actually really interesting because even after doing a lot of my research prior to getting into this, I had a different perspective of how all of this was going to go. I was thinking that this was like in regards to the death of the special needs child, but it's making sure that in case the caregiver, something happens with the caregiver, that the special needs person is well taken care of, not the other way around. So I had a
Mm-hmm.
question on here saying, can working with the dye industries, would y'all be able to point us in the direction to finding insurance plans for
Mm-hmm.
the special needs job? But now I'm more wondering, could y'all help find the the insurance policy for someone who's just now starting this? This is their first steps. They're coming to you, we're coming to you for the first time to even do that estate planning, and you say, hey, it'd be a good idea for you to get an insurance policy. Would y'all be able to
Mm-hmm.
walk us through those steps?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And that's part of that sort of intake process when we're looking at, assets, what's there. And I like to try to have that conversation with clients about what's their intention, what are they planning on leaving to this trust. And so then if they're like, well, I don't really have much, that's when the conversation might turn to, okay, well, not that because I'm obviously not selling insurance, I'm not pushing any products, but just the conversation might come up of, hey, this might be a good way to fund the trust and you might want to look into this. And then I usually will give people, two or three names of people that I've worked with in the past, that might be able to sell those products that I know are trustworthy people, that are not trying to just sell you something, but are more trying to do it for the right reasons kind of thing. So I'll absolutely give people names of good reputable either financial planners and or insurance agents that kind of handle those things for them and can kind of help them develop a financial plan, because that's the kind of other side of the coin of this is, okay, well, I've got this wonderful trust and it's all wrapped up in a nice little bow, but I've got to fund it in order to make it make sense, in order to make it have value for my loved one. And so, funding it is that other side. And so I do like to assist clients with that as much as I can.
Now, how does the having the life insurance actually fund the trust if it's not paid out until something happens to the person with life
Mhm.
insurance?
So it's a good question. I think I'll start that by answering that there's two different ways we can set up a trust. So one is you come in tomorrow, I draft a trust, you sign it, it exists from day one. I call that a standalone special needs trust. The other type of trust is what I refer to as a testamentary special needs trust, meaning it's in your will and it doesn't really exist unless or until something happens to you. So if you wanted to set up a special needs trust for your son, but you were like, I'm not really looking to put any money into it today, I'm just thinking, hey, I might go get this life insurance policy, and then that'll be kind of my legacy that I'm leaving by to make sure he's taken care of, then the trust doesn't really need to exist until you die. The life insurance policy pays out when you die, and so the trust sort of comes into existence right at the time that the policy is to be paid out. So they sort of come alive together in a way. And then because of that beneficiary designation, the policy proceeds are paid to that trust. And then that's when whoever you've named as the trustee sort of takes that money and they do with it what they need to do according to the terms of the trust.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So, The standalone one, that's the one where you just kind of create it, but you're not necessarily putting anything in it right off the back, but you can just already have it pre set up prior to something happening to the person with life
That's right.
insurance. And then the other option is not creating that trust account at all until something happens to the person with life insurance policy. And then it pays out and creates a trust in the same exact time, kind of like all at once.
That's right. And
Is
the
that correct?
advantage, there's advantages and disadvantages to both, I guess. The advantage sometimes that people find in the standalone trust is if they have other friends or family members that are, say, wanting to benefit, your child with special needs, then it's almost like a receptacle that anybody can deposit into. So if this trust exists, it already has its own tax ID number. And, if your mom or dad wanted to leave something for your son, they could do that, and they could direct it to that trust and then it wouldn't affect his benefits in any way. Um, or, if you wanted to fund something with it immediately, that's, you would need to have something that exists now. And some people want to do that. They want to just say, I'm going to go ahead and set aside a few $1,000s or whatever it is each year and put it into the trust. So it just sort of depends on how you're funding it and what your philosophy is on that. But again, if you were mainly going to fund it with life insurance, then there wouldn't really be a need to have it, I think, as a standalone. It'd probably be more likely to be the one that comes into existence, the testamentary trust that comes into existence just when you pass.
I really like the standalone one. It seems
Hmm.
like it gives a lot more options. It's something you can create now that you know is there. It's already set up. You don't have to worry about if it's going to work right when
Hmm.
everything's over with. It's and
That's
then
right.
like you said, it's really amazing allowing other family members or other people to be able to add to this trust fund instead of something created at the end and realizing it's not as much as it could have been or should have been.
Right.
You can kind of watch it grow over a period of time. Now, with this 503c that you had mentioned, trust fund, does it
Hmm.
also collect interest as well as it grows? Is it kind of like a
It
401k in
does.
that
So
aspect?
yes, exactly. So the assets are being actively invested, according to, you get to basically choose the type of plan that you want as far as investments concerned, whether I want to be a little more risky and get a little more interest income earned, or whether I want to be a little more conservative and just kind of invest in bonds or different things like that. When you set up the account, you can choose that. But then it's earning income based on whatever investment that it has. And as long as the money's sitting there, I mean, of course, who knows what the stock market's going to do tomorrow, but in theory, it's making money every day, hopefully. And, just like a 401k or other retirement account, that it's earning money and growing over time, and that hopefully, you're able to leave it there for some significant period of time. While the child's a minor, it's especially easy. And then even when they get older, if they don't necessarily need anything right away, or the parent's still sort of supporting them, they may not need anything much until the parent's gone.
That makes sense. Um, So, are you allowed to choose these investments that you pick? I know when I was setting up my 401k, I got to choose between a Vanguard 20 or Vanguard 40. Is that investment other than because I know you mentioned you can change it to like more like high yielding or high risk?
Hmm.
You have that ability to be able to be more hands on with the investments as well.
No, really, it's kind of I say that's one downside of the family trust is you don't have as much say so in the investments because they sort of handle all that, and they have a financial manager that manages it for them. So, like, for example, here it's Warren Averett, and they just basically it's pick one of these five portfolios, and that's what it's in. And of course, the investment manager at Warren Averett's managing it, and I'm sure they're doing a great job doing it, but the individuals don't really have a say so in, well, I want this and not that, this fund and not that fund. You sort of
It's
relinquish
kind of
your
like a package deal.
ability. That's right.
Pick this one package over here, and these within this package, you can see the investments. I'm assuming within each one of the portfolio packets,
Yeah.
so you can kind of be like, oh, I kind of like these ones over here more so than I like, this one has Nike and Reebok, this one has, Apple and Google. You can kind of see what's in there, but you can't be like, I want to swap the Apple out for the Nike or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, um, let's see here. So my last question, which we kind of already touched over, was how can having a life insurance plan how can having a life insurance plan tie into special needs planning? We kind of already covered that, but is there one of the questions that I had that I didn't mention earlier, because like I told you, I had the perspective mixed up, was how about life insurance? How can we get life insurance for our children with special needs if it was classified as pre-existing? Is that something that
Mhm.
you're familiar with hearing about and, with taking on these cases?
Right. No, I don't. I'm not as familiar with that issue. I would say, I mean, just like anything else, I guess it depends on the individual and what their disability is. But I would say, definitely don't be afraid to talk to multiple different people. And if you get a no from one person, that doesn't mean you're going to get a no from everybody. Um, and I think depending on, what the disability is, I mean, statistically, they may have a longer lifespan depending. So you may be able to get something. It just sort of depends. But pre-existing, with reference to the medical, I mean, I don't know if you're talking more in terms of life insurance of just, hey, we're not going to insure you because, you have this condition. Um,
Exactly,
so
because I
really
mean,
that's the
even in a
advice.
caregiver's need, I could have a disability of sorts, and walking to you on day one, you would suggest having life insurance, so therefore that my
Mhm.
my son with special needs can be able to have that extra added benefit. But if I'm going out and I'm
Right.
seeking this insurance, say I myself suffer from some kind of hip ailment that prevents me from walking.
Mhm.
I'm mentally capable of being able to do everything, but I just can't physically
Right.
take care of myself and him at the same exact time. A lot of companies, or I understand, or insurance companies don't like dealing with people who have pre-existing conditions or whatever some case. And
Right.
I didn't know if maybe you had ran into that, or if you ever had to assist anybody getting life insurance for their special needs person. So therefore, in a time that
Right.
an untimely death happens to them, that the guarantor or the caregiver is taken care of and not having to worry about financially stressing on the opposite end of that spectrum.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good question. And the only thing I would say to that is what I mentioned earlier about the second to die policy. I know sometimes that can be an answer with regard to the parent, if there was another adult that could be, another, like a healthier adult or somebody without a pre-existing condition that could also be on the policy. That sometimes can help, again, get around that issue because the insurer is more likely to kind of say. Of course, that could affect if that person's not the caregiver, so it works out in a married couple situation, where there's two adult caregivers or whatever, or if one of them's working and one of them's staying home to caregive. But if there's not that situation, it can be much more difficult. But I know that that's an option that they can explore. Um, and there might be other options they can explore besides insurance. There's different types of annuities and different things like that that you can do to kind of, if you want to try to invest some money now to grow something down the road, an annuity. And I by no means an annuity expert, so don't
Okay.
don't mistake me there. But I know that that's an option as well that you can explore, to be able to fund, um, and obviously retirement accounts and different things like that. So all that to say, insurance is a good option, but it's not the only option, for funding the trust.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Ms. I, for coming on and answering these questions.
No, you're so welcome. Thank you
This
for
is actually
having
a
me.
really oh, no worries. It's a really great, actually, eye opener for me because I'm the sole caregiver for my son, and I have not thought of these things. I never, it's the last thing you want to think about is whether or not something is actually going to happen to yourself. But it's a thing that happens every single day, and it's great to have these people with special needs, whether they be children or adults, make sure that they're well taken care of, and having that plan in place, having that special needs estate plan seems like it's a must need for everybody to get. And it's great to know that you've got the Carney attorney at law firm to be able to help and facilitate that. So once again, thank you so much, Ms. Dye, for coming in and explaining a lot of this with us, and taking your time out of the day to educate us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Well, you have yourself a wonderful rest of the week, and everybody else out there in Alabama Care, y'all have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will talk to y'all later. Thank you so much, Ms. Dye.
Bye.